The engine is starting up. Three, two, one.
Is there anyone here that would like to communicate with us?
Putting a dip in your hip, a glide in your stride. Welcome to the mothership, the home of the travelers of the universe, with shows throughout the week. Everything you want, everything you could need. From the paranormal to the supernatural, from the spiritual to the unknown, from emotions to comedy. You can find us at Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and so much more. This is R.I.F.T Nation Network, the RNN. And now, your featured show. Shall we begin?
The newest show sensation streaming throughout the multiverse. Your hang place in cyberspace for paranormal news and views. Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray.
Oh, welcome to Taboo Topics, everybody. I'm Gene Broida, and he's Stan Murray. How you doing, Stan?
I'm doing great.
All right. Well, before we can say
Look.
anything else, we got to read this disclaimer. So here we go. Starting the show. Everybody, settle in, get your popcorn. Here we go. This message is from the R.I.F.T Nation Network. Very important. Sensitive and offensive content disclaimer. Please note that this podcast may contain material that some listeners may find sensitive, offensive, or disturbing. We strive to create respectful and informative content, but topics discussed may include mature themes such as violence, explicit language, or controversial subjects, triggering content, including discussions related to mental health, trauma, or other sensitive issues, explicit language. Occasionally, our guests or hosts may use strong language. While we aim to handle these topics with care and empathy, we encourage listeners to exercise discretion. If you find any content distressing, consider skipping or seeking support. Remember that this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. If you need assistance, please consult a qualified expert. Well, here we are again, Stan. How was your week?
It was good. A good, productive week. I got quite a few things done, and when I'm productive, then I'm happy. So, happy person.
You're a doer?
Do. Yep.
Are you a list keeper as well? A list maker? Do you like
No,
checking things off the list?
no. I don't have to. I don't do that anymore. One thing,
Anymore?
whatever I get done at the end of the day, I learn to be happy with. And if I get nothing done, be happy with that. So,
Well, let's check out our chat. Anybody joining us yet here tonight? Because I know that we're a new show and we're in a fun, kind of a late time slot. But hopefully the folks on the West Coast will appreciate starting at 7 o'clock. And of course, it's 10 o'clock on the East Coast. The date is, I have to look, April 22nd. It is a Monday. And what's going on in the chat there, Stan?
I'm
Anybody?
not
Yeah.
not seeing anybody now. That may
All
be
righty. Well,
on my
here
end.
comes Judy. Judy came in.
Okay.
Hey,
Hey,
Judy.
Judy.
Good evening to you, too. We were just commenting that it's 10 p.m. on the East Coast, 7 p.m. on the left coast. And I think both Stan and I are sitting pretty squarely in Central Time Zone here. Full moon. What do you say? Full moon? Tomorrow, I think, or overnight. Moon's getting pretty full.
Well, you talk to policemen and emergency workers. That's when they get the busiest.
I don't
That's,
doubt it a bit.
yeah,
The werewolf
there's,
comes out in some people, doesn't it?
I guess that's what where it came. It's a full moon. What do you want to say? It brings
Like
your creeps out.
lunacy. The word
Yes.
lunacy's
Well,
from the
I guess
moon for
that's where it came
sure.
from. No.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Hey, well, Judy's ready to have conversation. This is awesome. I propose that we get right underway because I'm very excited about tonight's taboo topic. This concerns a gentleman I've had the pleasure of meeting a couple of times in my relentless quest for knowledge about mostly for paranormal topics. I specialize in UFOs, crop circles, and ESP. As a mystic, I dabble in magic and occultism. And as a spiritualist, I go with Wicca, Pantheon for me. How about you, Stan? Do you care to share any of that? You don't have to.
No, my interest is like that. It's always, I want to say, more of a amateurs. It's just something that I've always had interested in, and with this program and with the input from some of our viewers and listeners, it's expanded my universe about it. And like it's just like it's one door or one question, it leads to another. So I'm enjoying. It's
Very, very true.
yeah.
So I've only been to a few UFO conferences, but oddly enough, I've had the pleasure of meeting Travis Walton twice. He's a real person and he's still alive. I just watched an interview with him on the Joe Rogan show. So when you hear this story, it's kind of hair raising, as are many UFO stories, but there's also quite a lot to pick apart and take away. So without further ado, here we go. The UFO abduction of Travis Walton. This happened in November. It was November 5th, 1975, in the Apache, I don't know how to pronounce that, National Forest. Do you know how to pronounce that, Stan?
No,
I don't
Sturgis.
wanna butcher it.
No,
I don't wanna
I'm
butcher
sure.
it. But what I can tell you is that this place is in Arizona. It's in
No.
Arizona, and it's forest land where Travis and a crew of gentlemen were felling trees under contract to the National Forest Service. Okay, so these were contracting lumbermen, is another word for forester. They were lumberjacks and they were okay. All right. They were lumberjacks and they were okay. Got down. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I got carried away. I got sidetracked. To present myself just a little bit, I am Jean Broida, co-host of Taboo Topics with Jean Broida and Stan Murray, my excellent co-host. I have written a book about UFOs because I want to talk about UFOs. And a radio show host said, write a book and then you can be on shows. And it worked. Here I am hosting a show. Wow. So you too can be an author, believe you me. Especially if you're passionate about a topic the way I am about ufology. And it's not because I claim to have firsthand experiences. I like to look into people who have. It's probable that I have had one as a baby or several or multiple or perhaps my whole life with screen memories. Who knows for sure? Who knows why some people are drawn to the topic of UFOs and other people are completely indifferent? Any thoughts, Stan?
I think, like I said, just a natural curiosity, and then I think some for I want to say maybe the non it's more of a state of denial that that there is that we are alone, that there's nothing, there's no, I want to say, a boogeyman out there. Just wanted to deny that there is a existence until they experience it themselves. But they just I want to say a stubbornness. I don't want to say a closed-minded, but until they're very skeptical, until they experience something themselves.
Mm. You know, that makes me think about our conversation last week about Betty and Barney Hill, where a married couple had very different subjective experiences, as you'll recall. Betty was enthusiastic and bubbly. She had called the UFO over to the car and then it followed him. And Barney got really creeped out, and his military instincts to defend and protect kicked in.
Yeah,
And after the event, as you'll recall, he never really recovered. He died something like 6 years later of let's say it was a stomach ulcer that
yes,
killed him. But Betty lived another 20 some years, and she was talking about UFOs and calling UFOs and photographing UFOs the whole time.
yeah. It was very traumatic for Barney. And again, with his training, everything is presumed to be a threat until proven otherwise.
Mm, true that. True that.
Yeah.
But isn't that also interesting? An interesting commentary, if you take it just a little bit further, that because, how do I want to say this? Because our military is because in the United States, our
Hmm.
military is in charge of UFO affairs, essentially, officially. And because we know the military mindset is basically attack or defend,
Yes.
perhaps if these beings, or if any of these beings, because there's many multiple types of beings visiting Earth, it would seem from anecdotes that
Hmm.
seem very credible. Um, there are Pacific aliens, meaning peaceful, peace loving. There are Aryan, meaning from Aries, Martian, militant. There's hostiles, there's friendlies, and there's neutrals, to use kind of military parlance. And inasmuch as our military has been presumably formally interfacing with aliens all along for 70 some years, they brought that military bearing and mindset to the matter of UFOs. And in fact, it's persisting to this day that it was a military matter, the matter of Navy pilots, many Navy pilots, not just pilots in the aircraft, but personnel on board the carrier ships,
Hmm.
where the aircraft are taking off and doing training exercises off the coast of San Diego, California, on the left coast. They are reporting all the time, not just once, not just in isolated events, but and not constant, but over a month, several sightings. And I spoke at length with a serviceman who had been on one of those carriers, and he said, "Oh yeah, it wasn't commonplace, but it got to the point where, we'd go out, we'd have a smoke break on deck, and there'd be a light show, and we're like, well, that's happening again." It was this sort of not blasé, but you couldn't talk about it. And it was that psychological suppression, I think, that really prompted, I think it really did prompt, I hope it prompted the Pentagon to divulge and share with the world that, yeah, the hardware is real. They're still not admitting or copping to the beings, the intelligent beings that have created these craft and travel here, and to what purpose they do that, and the fact that they are either pro, con, or neutral, right? So the military has brought their taint, if you will, their filter is a more polite term. The military has put its filter over the UFO phenomenon, whereas experiencers, people who've had firsthand encounters, do not typically adopt that mindset. Now, Barney Hill did; he was ex-military. But for example, Travis Walton, as we will soon see, did not have that predisposition, if you will, going into this incident. He knew probably very little to nothing about UFOs. He didn't call it over like Betty Hill did, for example. So, without further ado, Here we go. Talking about Travis Walton abducted by UFO, November 5th, 1975, right here. That's a close up of Arizona there. And what we have is Flagstaff up on the, well, I've got a cursor here. Flagstaff is up. Let me make this big. Here we go.
There we go.
Flagstaff is up here, up north, up here, up north. And the action was around an area called Heber Overguard, and the arrowhead is pointing to where that is on the map. Phoenix, just for reference, Phoenix is down here, lower left. So we got Phoenix and Flagstaff. A lot of people who travel out here would recognize these as landmarks. And so basically, the action is happening in the middle of nowhere between those cities and in the mountainous region where there's lumbering going on. And by the way, oops,
That was me.
there we go. By the way, uh, the these gentlemen, a lot of the crew members lived in the town of Snowflake, and they commuted up this road that's in blue there, around within that red circle that I drew. They would drive from their town. They would carpool up in the crew boss's truck, and they would drive together, do a day of lumbering like lumberjacks do, and then come home. And some of them would toss down a beer after work. There were a couple brothers, cousins, some people were related. They weren't all related, but this was a small town with small town mentality, and pretty much everybody knew everybody's business. And these were just regular, straight up guys who wore plaid shirts and went out and sweated in the sun in the summertime and froze their nerds off in the wintertime. So, stage is set. I'm just going to read from my book because this is chapter 8 in my book, Taboo Topics. I'm sorry, my book is Unknown Objects. Unknown Objects, the top 10 U.S. UFO cases. And so I'm just going to read one paragraph here and then we're going to talk about this, Stan. So here's the story. In early November 1975, as we've already established, Travis Walton, a native of Phoenix, Arizona, lived in the small community of Snowflake, which is about 175 miles northeast of his hometown. Walton was then 22 years old, and he was under contract with the Forest Service in the, I'm going to try this again, Apache Sitgreaves. All right, that's our story, and we're sticking to it. Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, and that's near Heber Overguard. Look at the map in Arizona. And his job was to cut trees with 6 other men on his crew. 6 other men. They were 28-year-old boss Mike Rogers, then also Dwayne Smith, John Goulet, Steve Pierce, Alan Dallas, Dalis, and Ken Peterson. So these guys were out, they had cut lumber, they had finished their work, and they were driving home in the usual way when out of I believe it was right hand, so passenger side of the vehicle, Travis was one of the first to just sort of notice off to the right a light where maybe there sure not to be one, because it wasn't the setting sun. At first, thought maybe setting sun. Had dismissed it. Campfire up on the hill, maybe hunters up there. Didn't really focus on it. But another guy in the truck soon after said, "Hey, what is that?" And pointed in the same direction. So everybody in the truck, except for the driver, looked over and like, what is that? We don't know what that is. And so Mike, the crew boss, drove to the point where there was a clearing in the forest, an area, in other words, a tract of land they had already cleared, or I think they were the only crew up there. And his story on Joe Rogan was that they had cleared this land. So they'd come from an area where they'd been working on clearing, and then through dense forest that hadn't been cleared. And then they came upon a clearing, and Mike pulled over so that they could get a better look. And what they saw was a real shocker. They saw a UFO, and it was close. It was only about 20, 30 yards away when they first spotted it, and when they drove in toward it, it was closer. It was rather closer, because Travis. So I'm just going to stop at this point. So Stan, at this point, pretend that you're one of these guys, any of these guys in the truck, and you're driving along. So you're with your buds. These are your buds. You drink beers together. You tell lies. You all know each other. You're seeing something weird in the sky. You think it's a campfire, but then you get a better look and you see it's an object hovering in the sky, and it's not very far away, and it seems pretty big. At that point, what would your action be?
My reaction would be probably, part of it's going to be the reaction is going to be fear, and then there's that curiosity is what is it? And I would probably be Travis. I want to get a closer look at this, but I don't want to be detected.
Okay, well, don't let the cat out of the bag.
Don't
Don't talk about Travis. We're talking about what you would do.
But
So you think you'd be curious? You want to get a better look?
but I would stay in the vehicle. I stay in the
but you stayed in
vehicle.
the vehicle.
Stay
Okay,
in the
okay.
vehicle.
All right.
And
Well,
then I would say, okay, I'm not going to get any closer. I'll head the other direction then.
all right. Well, that was a bit of a spoiler alert, but that's okay. And by the way, we got some newcomers. If you're new and just tuned in, welcome, welcome, welcome to Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray. We are talking about the 1975 abduction case of Travis Walton by UFO. And it happened here on the map where we're looking at that red circle in the middle, Heber Overguard, up the hill, if you will, up the mountain from Snowflake in more central eastern Arizona. Okay, so what happened next? I'm going to read out of my book again, Chapter 8, Unknown Objects, the top 10 U.S. UFO cases. And then we can talk about this a little bit. So here's what Travis said. When we pulled up into the light, where we had a straight view, it was unmistakable. It was less than 100 feet away. It was a clearly defined metallic disc outlined against the sky, and fantastic in the grandeur of it. All the guys in the crew, as frightening as it was, also describe it as being beautiful. It was so perfect. Now, when I read that the first time, I thought that's kind of odd. That's kind of odd. They were transfixed, is kind of how I get it. They were fearful, and probably when you see something, there's a saying that there's really no perfection in nature. There's no perfect circle in nature. That's something I heard along the way. They had they had an emotional state, which is typical of UFO experiences. They had an emotional state, and they're looking at this thing. It's 100 feet away. Is not very far. I'm 5 feet tall. So
No, that's 100,
how
100
long's
feet
a
is
football
close.
field?
100
How far is it?
yards.
Yards? So a third of that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so pretty
That's
darn
up close
close.
and personal.
Okay, so they're seeing that it's definitely a metallic object. It's this is not a planet. This is not swamp gas. This is something
No.
that's real. It's real, and they can't believe it's real. So that there in itself is a very difficult emotional state to deal with. And they're looking at it. And so, as Stan had insinuated before, because he would do the same thing, he thinks, well, actually, he wouldn't do exactly the same thing. On impulse, Travis says, he got out of the truck to get a closer look. Curiosity seized him, and he wasn't thinking about danger. He was thinking about, I have to get a closer look. And so he crept up on this thing, kind of like a hunter would do, where he crouched down and he was going from shrubbery to shrubbery. I'm thinking about the Knights Who Go Knee on Monty Python. No, he was creeping from, cover to cover, right? He didn't want to expose himself. And all of a sudden, this craft started to move. And the noise it had been emitting changed. And when that happened, he said he dove for cover. He dove maybe a bit strong, but he looked around and he saw a tree that was lying down, a dead tree lying down, and he headed for that. He bent over and he wanted to hide behind it. He felt intimidated, and so he kind of dove behind this tree, and this thing started making more noise, and it was a combination of a deep rumbling that he said was more of a feeling than a sound, and there were very high-pitched overtones as well. He's probably again trying to describe something in words that's literally indescribable, as most sounds really are. Okay, it's hard to describe a sound without hearing it. Okay, to put a sound into words, probably impossible. But this is so typical of UFO close encounters where there's vibration, and sound is vibration after all. But this startled him, and at that point, when it continued to get louder and this rumbling or tremoring became more pronounced, he began to freak out a little bit. He began to think about danger and being a little close. And on Joe Rogan, he said he stood up, and when he stood up, because he said that log was closer than he had been before. When he stood up, he's about 8 foot away. 8 feet away from the craft. 8 feet. That's from me to the door over there.
Okay.
That's like if you took a couple steps, you'd be touching it, right? So at that point, a bluish green beam or energy field came out of the craft, struck him with such a force that it lifted him off the ground and threw him back about 12 feet. And he landed on his head and shoulder and kind of crumpled over and fell unconscious. And that's the end of part one of his story. The guys in the truck looked out and they're watching this whole thing out the windows. And and by the way, they had been yelling at Travis as soon as he got out of the truck to come back, get back in the truck, get back now. We're leaving, get back in the truck. So when he got knocked out, they split. Mike gunned the truck in reverse, and they couldn't hightail it out of there, which means go very fast. For those of you who aren't colloquial like me from central Kentucky, they couldn't hightail it out because this logging road was extremely rutted. And if you've ever been on a country road like that, that's a dirt road with some gravel thrown down, and the gravel's been rutted out with rain and heavy vehicles passing over it, Mike had to slow down a few times. I don't know if the vehicle had manual gears or was an automatic. I suspect it was probably geared, meaning a manual. But in any event, he was slowing down, had to slow down to a crawl, basically, very low speeds. And when he did that, these guys were talking in the car excitedly about what they'd seen, and they were having immediate remorse as they drove away for leaving their fallen comrade behind. And they were saying, let's go back. Some of them were saying, we should go back and get Travis. And the further away they got, the more of them were thinking that way. And Mike, especially the crew boss, was like, we can't just leave him there. But the others were like, man, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I don't even want to go back there. I don't want to go back and see what that thing was. So Mike drove the truck to the paved road from the rim road, which was dirt and gravel. He got to the paved road back to town, and he stopped there, and he said to the others, I have to go back for him. I have to go back for Travis. Now, I understand if you don't want to go, and I can leave you here on the road and come back and get you on the way back. And I guess none of them relished the prospect of being out of the relative protection of the vehicle, standing on the road in the middle of the night in an area where they'd just seen a UFO. None of them took that offer. They all went back to look for Travis. And when he got there, no Travis. Gone. In fact, no evidence of any disturbance of any kind that they could see in the dark. In other words, no snapped tree branches, no scorch marks or smells, no sounds. Just it looked like normal forest to them. So that freaked them out. That must have been a very shocking night for these guys. They drove back to town, puzzled and talking about where was Travis. And when they got to town, they filed I believe that being in the middle of the night, they waited till the following morning, but they didn't wait very long. And one of the first things they did was file a police report or a sheriff's report, being the small place that it is. They've told law enforcement, "We've lost a man in the woods," basically. And they went on and told about the UFO. And when they told about the UFO, law enforcement took a skeptical and somewhat dim view. Found it very hard to believe that a UFO had picked Travis up. And what did they think instead, Stan?
Well, they was covering their tracks. The law enforcement thought, okay, you've killed your coworker for whatever reason, and now you're suspects, but no evidence and no real motive. So, but yeah, like I said, they definitely
Yeah,
came.
they suspected foul
They
play,
put
didn't they?
themselves on the they put themselves on the radar screen.
They law enforcement, because law enforcement was not allowed to accept a paranormal explanation in 1975 of a UFO case, that they have to find some other explanation. And when 7 guys go out into the woods and 6 guys come back, it was accident or foul play. That was law enforcement's take on it. And to the point where the law enforcement was opening a criminal investigation on these other 6 guys. They were convinced that Travis had come to no good at the hands of these guys. They were responsible. And that was not a good feeling, because Travis had a brother on the actually his brother wasn't on the crew, but he had, these guys all knew each other, as I said before. They're from
Yeah.
a small town. Just the insinuation, just the accusation that they would do something to their friend, if not a friend, a friendly associate. This was fairly outrageous, and they didn't like that at all, of course, being under the scrutiny of possible murderers. That wasn't very nice for them. But
They was telling
yeah,
the
go ahead.
truth. This is what we saw, and now, like so often happens, is okay. You guys are crazy, or you've done something wrong, and this is the best excuse you can come up with. No, we're not gonna buy it. So law enforcement, they're skeptical. I want to say due process. Okay, this you're going to come up with something else happened, and you're coming up with this wild goose story about a UFO taking your friend. No, we're not buying it.
That's exactly right. That was exactly their attitude. And who can blame them, I suppose, after all the CIA mind melding that UFOs don't exist, don't exist, don't exist, don't exist, don't exist, can't exist, won't exist, ever exist, but now they do exist.
Yeah.
Only we don't know who built them. Okay, but I digress. Okay, so back to Travis. So that's what was happening back in Snowflake. The guys on the crew were being investigated by law enforcement because they lost a man. 5 days later, Travis found himself in the middle of the night, deposited on that same blacktop road that led into Snowflake. And here's a map that I've constructed that shows the X marks the spot where the UFO was, and then the yellow arrow shows where on the road that he was left. And he walked. He got up. He was dazed, and as he basically regained consciousness, he saw a bright white light shoot into the air above him. And later he said, I suppose that was a UFO, and they had dropped me off. And so he felt drained, groggy, queasy, not right. He knew he was not right. And he was trying to sort his thoughts. He knew where he was, and he knew how to get to Snowflake. So he walked into town. It was about some miles. He walked into town, and of course it was much, much later, early hours in the morning now, when there's 2 bridges apparently into Snowflake, and he had walked over one of them, car bridges, auto bridges, but he walked over one of them, and on the other side was a parking lot with payphones in it. Remember payphones? 1975. So he had change with him apparently, because he was able to phone his brother, And his brother thought somebody was pranking him because this case quickly gained notoriety in this area. And I'm sure that the 6 crew members who came back without Travis were being teased and tormented, slightly ridiculed about their UFO story. The fact that they were so forthright in talking about it, I'm sure really freaked a lot of people out. And so there had been prank phone calls from people pretending to be Travis, which is really messed up if you think about it. And so phone calls to the family members saying, "Hey, it's Travis, I'm back." And I'm sure they were ludicrous. I can just imagine, but this is speculative on my part, the kinds of prank calls that people would make. Very upsetting. When in fact your brother, your brother-in-law, your cousin is missing, and presumed dead at the hands of foul play. That's not a very nice joke. In any event, that was going on. And so when the real Travis called in the middle of the night, sounding messed up, out of sorts, croaking a bit, saying, "Please come get me. I'm on the outskirts of town." His brother, and I want to get the facts right. It might have been his brother-in-law who picked him up. Do you remember that part there, Stan?
I see. I think it.
I gotta check it out here.
UFO trends.
In any event, one of his relatives, close relatives, while Stan's checking that out, brother-in-law, picked him up, actually stopped to get a cousin on the way, and the 2 of them drove to get Travis. And when they found Travis, he had 5 days worth of beard grown on him. Travis was not aware of this. Travis had not looked in a mirror or anything like that. Travis was still trying to sort out what had happened to him. And so his brothers said, his relatives said, remarked on his beard, and he put his hand to his face. He was like, "What?" And they said, "Dude, you've been gone." He thought he'd only been gone for a few hours. He thought it was the same night. And they said, "You have been gone for 5 days." And he found that very difficult to believe. But he was recovering his memory over the next few days, presumably, and he told his story. So he's back in town. He's lost 5 days. He's upset physically and mentally, but as soon as he gets sorted out, gets some rest, and here's what everybody else has been going through. For one thing, they took him right away to the sheriff's office and said, "Look who showed up. Look who showed up. It's Travis." So that really didn't validate the UFO story at all, but it did clear the other guys of possible murder charge. So that was a good thing, right? And ultimately, all of them took lie detector tests, and they all passed lie detector tests. But of course, a lie detector test is not what am I trying to say? It's not admissible in court. They're not reliable enough, I guess. But they did pass them. They agreed to take them, and they passed them. So that's something. Anybody who would talk to these people would probably believe them, is my thinking, because I talked to Travis Walton and I believe him. I believed him actually before I even talked to him, which may be prejudice on my part. But as a UFO researcher, there's just some stories that ring true and some that don't. And this one is one that rings very true. And Travis has stuck to his story his entire life. And when Joe Rogan asked him in this recent interview to go back to that day, mentally, go back to that day, what did you see? Because in this interview, Travis Walton is avoiding talking about his actual experience, and he's told the story so many times. I think he thought Joe Rogan knew the story, all the audience members would know the story, and he's been to so many UFO conferences where people do know the story. He was just tracking along and making side comments. But what he said was, when pressed, he said, "I don't like to go back and think about that day or night. I don't like to go back to that time. I avoid." he said, I've repressed it. Basically, he said, I have repressed the experience as much as I can. But when it was fresher in his mind, when he was younger, because this did happen, what, 75, 85, 95, 05,
49
15,
years ago.
almost 50
Oh,
years
almost.
ago. Almost 50 years ago. And he was 22 at the time. So his story was that he woke up on a, he woke up, it was
Yeah.
hot and humid and light, and his vision was blurred. He's opening his eyes, and he thinks he's in a hospital. He just gets the impression he's in a hospital. He's on a hospital bed or table in an examining room. This is so typical of a UFO encounter of when you're on a craft. He says operating room, and he assumed, of course, he was on Earth and that there were human doctors around. He saw shadowy figures. He figured they're doctors. I'm being taken care of. Somebody has found me and put me in a hospital, and I'm okay. I'm okay. And then, oops, and then he sees whom these beings are, and they are not humans. They are short. They have rounded heads, big eyes. They're not grays, exactly. They're chalky in complexion. They're little. They have big bulgy eyes, as I said. And they're uniformed, and they're about, what do you say, about 4 feet tall. I think they were not
Yeah.
tall. They were short, chalky, starey. They didn't talk, and he flipped out. He's a guy, so he's having a fight or flight response, and his instinct was to fight. His first instinct was fight, and so he struck one of these beings as it approached him. He lashed out and he struck it, and it fell against another one of them. So he realized these guys are weak and puny, and I bet I could take them. So he also found that he was not constrained to this table. He wasn't strapped down. He had something on his chest, as I recall, like a sensor device, a chest plate of some kind. And he removed that and stood up, or probably stood up rather vigorously, excitedly, and intimidated these beings. Once they fell onto each other, once the one got shoved into the other one, they were in a bit of disarray. I don't think this is, I'm speculating here, but I would imagine this had never happened to them before, that a human had fought back like this. And so Travis retreated on the other side of this table where he had been lying, and he picked up an object. It was a glass tube of some kind. He assumed it was some sort of instrument for procedures in this room, but he couldn't say for sure what it was. He picked it up and he brandished it like a stick, I suppose, or something. It who knows if it was just to make himself feel better about the situation, but he was going to use it as a weapon if he had to. I guess he was just going to start bashing with it. I don't think he was thinking all this through very well, but whatever. By picking up this object and waving it around at them and threatening them with it, these three beings left the room and they headed off to the right down the corridor. So he's looking around. He's like, here's my chance to escape. And so he leaves the room, but he goes the other way. He goes off to the left. And he's in your typical UFO hallway, lighted, but not direct lighting, indirect lighting, can't really pinpoint the source. And he's making hot tracks down the hallway, and he gets to a side room he can go into, and it's a very large room, and it's got a projection screen, and on this, basically a whole wall, is a star map. And in the center of this very large room is a chair, and next to the chair is a control panel which has buttons and levers to pull. So he sits in this control chair and he's thinking, how can I get out of here? How can I get, actually, he didn't sit down first. He first examined this room thoroughly for an exit hatch, some escape hatch, door to the exterior, to get out of this, wherever he was, just to get out. He wanted to get out. So he didn't find that. It was a seamless room. And so he sat in the chair in the middle, thinking, I don't know what he was thinking. He didn't know what he was thinking really, but he started, this is so human. He started pushing buttons and pulling levers, and the star map started to change. And when that happened, he thought, maybe I don't know it, but I'm steering the ship into danger. So he stopped doing that. He stopped fiddling with knobs, and he got up, and he didn't really know what to do. He looked over at the doorway where he'd come in, and he saw a human-like figure dressed in a spacesuit with the archetypal round fishbowl helmet leaning in the doorway. And so he ran toward this being, thinking he was another human, an astronaut in a spacesuit. And he ran toward this being and he said, "Oh, am I glad to see you?" Basically, how do we get out of here? And the being, well, when he got closer, he could see this being was tall and had blonde hair, so a Nordic. We would call this a Nordic type of alien, and very handsome, extremely handsome, inside this fishbowl of a helmet. And the being motioned, didn't speak, motioned for him to follow. And so he did follow. And he followed him down the corridor and through an area and out of this rather enclosed and very hot and muggy space through, I forget what it's called, but it's a hallway that attaches one craft to a hangar, basically.
Hmm.
Like when you get on an airplane, that ramp that they pull out there. He
Jetway?
described something, yeah, jetway, something like that, but a UFO way. He described going from one atmosphere, which was very cloying and hot and claustrophobic, and he didn't like it at all, to a much more open and airy and pleasant space. And then they got into a very large, an even larger room that he described as a UFO hangar, hangar, like an aircraft hangar, HANGAR, not a clothes hanger, but an airplane hangar. And he said, and he saw other craft there. So his conclusion at that point himself was that he had come from a smaller craft, the craft that had knocked him out, and that he was being escorted elsewhere. And that is, in fact, what was happening. And so there's great descriptions of this hangar and how it was illuminated and the windows that it had that were backlighted, and he couldn't see outside. He wanted to see outside. He wanted to get outside. He wanted to escape, and he couldn't. And he's asking questions of this being, and this being is not saying a word. He's like, "Wow, where are you from? And how long have you been here? And who are you with? What agency are you with? And what's going on? And why am I here? And what's just happened? And blah 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 blah." And this being says nothing. Finally, they get to a room where there's two other similar beings in the same uniforms, which, by the way, were blue and made of a material described as kind of like velour, so soft and velvety. That's how he described it, blue with some insignia that he didn't recognize. There were three of them in there, and one of them was a woman. And without saying a word, they approached him and led him toward another table. And when he saw this table, they started guiding him toward it to sit him down on it and recline him upon it. And that's where he started to flip out a little bit. And he's like, "No, I don't want to do this." And they forced him basically onto the table. He was outnumbered and he was weak. So they got him onto the table. And the woman got basically a nose mask. It didn't have any hoses on it, but he said it was like an anesthetics mask in a hospital, but it wasn't hooked up to anything that he could see. She put that over his nose and mouth, and he lost consciousness again. And that's his story on board the craft. Then his story picks up on the blacktop outside of Snowflake, where the UFO shoots up into the air and out of sight. And he's coming back to waking state consciousness and realizing he's not there anymore. He's back in familiar territory, and he can get to town. And that's what he needs to do, is get back to town. and get all this sorted out in his mind. But it's not clear he ever has actually got it all sorted out in his mind, because how do you sort this out in the mind, in one's mind? But there was an interesting observation by Travis Walton decades later. Actually, decades later, he started talking about how, after having further encounters with, well, with craft, he saw craft after that. And there's a theory that, once touched, essentially, or once touched by UFO was going to be my comment, but, and that's rather eloquent, but basically, once you've had a close encounter with a UFO, they're tracking you. Basically, that you're on their list. So if he hadn't been on their list before, he was on their list then. And he doesn't like to talk about it, but he says that after that incident, he began to see craft, and that they were of all kinds, all descriptions. They weren't all the archetypal flying saucers like this one that he went into, but all kinds. And I get the impression it's not a very pleasant experience for him. It's unsettling that, why has he been marked, and why are they, why do they keep coming around? But in any event, his later conclusion was that the beam out of the spacecraft was not a weapon, because his first thought was they shot me down and then they took me aboard, and his later, to examine me, but I didn't die. That was his first take on it. But later he said, I think maybe, and he's not sure, he said, I think maybe they killed me, or they knocked me out so hard that I was about to die, and they brought me aboard to fix me because it violated their prime directive or some such, non-interference. In other words, that they had interfered with a human being and taken a life or severely injured a life. Now, it's hard to know, because there's plenty other cases where people got injured and not fixed. There was no reparation, if you will, no remediation. So this is all coming from Travis and his mind, right? His subconscious ruminating and rehashing and remembering all those suppressed thoughts, because remember, he doesn't want to remember this stuff. He told Joe Rogan he doesn't want to remember this stuff, but he can't help but remember it. I mean, if you went through this, how could you really suppress it? You couldn't. It's going to come out. And so he thinks now they took him aboard on purpose to heal him, basically to heal him, because they didn't expect him to percuss like he did. I guess that's the word I want to use. He had a concussion when he hit the ground, and maybe he was dying. Who knows? But in any event, he now thinks they were well disposed, right? They were positives and friendlies, that they were well disposed, which is typical of Nordics and other people's accounts, that they are more friendly to neutral, not hostile, and that they felt sorry for what they had done and wanted to patch it up, make it right. And that they just sort of unceremoniously dumped him on the road to town, like, well, you know where you are, you can get home from here. Pretty wild and crazy, don't you think, Stan?
Yes, and like I said, those 5 days, maybe that was his recovery time. Maybe, like I said, from the time he was injured, he had to stay underneath their care where he could go for himself. Um, one of my thoughts is like this superior intellect these are beings have. Uh, we talked about the intelligence, but what about their emotional? Maybe their emotion quotients are so much higher. Maybe they don't experience things like hatred or to hurt or warfare. Maybe that is beyond their. Maybe they've evolved beyond that. What we refer to violence. Maybe that's not in their realm anymore. Maybe they say we've hurt somebody. Its responsibility was redeem the situation. I'll just throw that out there.
That sounds entirely plausible to me, at least. I mean, the fact is, when we're talking about alien beings, we're talking about alien beings. And as humans, how could we possibly know what they think, if they feel? When I first started investigating UFOs decades and decades ago, I wondered, one of the first things I wondered was, do they feel emotions? Are they capable of feeling emotions? Well, at the time, knowing less than I know now, I assumed there weren't very many kinds of aliens and that they would tend to share traits. But now I don't think that. I think there are many kinds of aliens that don't necessarily share traits, okay, or characteristics, and don't conduct their societies the same way. So I
We
do
had,
think, in other words, I think that the universe operates very much in reality as portrayed on Star Trek, with a
uh,
federation, a galactic federation of good guys, if you will, pro-humans. When we say good guys, history's written by the winners. So the good guys would be pro-humans. We're human. So we're writing the history from our perspective. The ones who help us would be the good guys, and the ones who want to destroy us would be the bad guys. And the ones in the middle are just the Ferengi are the Ferengi. You know, the Ferengi just want to trade, right? They want to capitalize. I imagine there's some of them out there too. Neutrals, we don't care who kills who. We just want some profit.
But this situation, we see basically two different species, and it was taking the one that seemed like the more human ones had to get into the picture to help, I want to say, diffuse the situation or to calm them down. These I can relate to these what I'm seeing now as opposed to the little men. Um, but so we're kind of an example. So whatever is going on out there, like I said, these species can cooperate together.
Yes, we've seen coalitions like this in this story. Case in point, uh, just want to shout out Keith. Thanks for joining us. Monica, Renee, so good to see everybody here on Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray. Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. We've been talking about Travis Walton tonight. We're winding down, but we got a little bit to do here. It is chapter 8 in my book. Should you care to head over to Amazon and check that out. Stan, you had made an interesting comment to me uh, about the atmospheric conditions inside the craft, where how the atmospheric conditions might relate to these species of aliens.
Yeah,
Would you share that?
yeah. It seemed like, and maybe this is when it was back in the hangar that he observed that we had maybe the other species came in, but it seemed like the ones like that preferred the more human and the more humanoid or human ones, like we like an environment. We don't like humidity. We don't like the heat. We like a more so. I just thought that was kind of my observation was we just seen two different species, two different environments for them.
So you think that that hot, humid, cloying environment was for the chalky white ones?
Yes, yes, definitely.
And that the hangar, and so that the Nordic, see, what I don't know is if the Nordics were wearing the helmets inside that other craft. Maybe they could take their helmets off in there, but that's speculation on my part. Anyway, I wanted to find this quote about, let's see if I can here. I don't want to take a lot of time for it. But he talked about, here, I know where I can find it real quick.
While you're looking at that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming on tonight. I mostly try to reply to, but I'm not something about screen. I'm not allowed, haven't been able to reply to your texts, to your messages. But again, I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight.
And I found the quote. This was the haunting memory Travis Walton shared with the world. Well, actually shared it first with his brothers as they drove him back from the phone booths, the bank of phone booths in that parking lot outside of Snowflake. And they drove him home. And he was kind of babbling to him and describing what had happened to him. And he was completely freaked out, terrified. He said, they were awful. White skin, great big eyes. Those eyes, those horrible eyes, they just kept looking at me. I I'm sorry. I have the utmost respect for Travis Walton. I believe he's a truth teller. Like I say, I've met him a couple times. He seems straight up. And you know what, Stan? It just occurred to me this afternoon. As a personality and as a person, he reminds me. Well, you remind me of him. He reminds me of you. You're both men of the land, right? You're a farmer dude, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You farm, or you had a career farming.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. And he was out in the woods lumbering. So rural men, rural gentlemen who are, you know, Stan, one thing I really like about you, you tell it like it is without a lot of embellishment. Okay. And I get the same impression from Travis Walton. He's not, he didn't want the publicity. He didn't want this to happen to him. He wished it never happened. But since it did happen, kind of like Betty Hill, he thought maybe his only recourse was to talk about it and raise consciousness about it. And I'm of the opinion that a lot of the friendly, so called friendly or pro human aliens instruct us who have had experiences, us humans who have had experiences, to talk about, to violate the CIA directive not to talk about it and talk about it anyway. Not that they say it's a CIA directive, but we know it is. That to go ahead and talk about it anyway, because talking about it raises consciousness. What do you think, Stan?
Yes. I think one of the hardest things is to suppress, not be able to verbalize, not be able to tell your story. So the more that they do tell it, then it beats down that wall of untruthness, falsehoods.
Yeah. I'm with you. Well, before we sign out, I just want to ask all our valued and esteemed members in our audience here in our live studio audience, do you have any questions about the Travis Walton case or ideas for future shows? This is the time to lay it on us. We appreciate you so much. Such a pleasure to have you with us. It's great to live in a country where we can talk about taboo topics, at least to some extent, more than in other countries, apparently. So I'm very glad to be alive. I'm glad to be an American. I'm proud of my country. I don't agree with everything that's going on necessarily, but we have the power to change things for the better. I do believe that human beings have the power to change. We can beat the reptilians if we put our minds to it. And we could talk about that on another show. Thank you, Monica. Appreciate your appreciation. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing us out to the world, admins and mods and producers. We love you all. Shouting out our head honcho, Ed. Thank you, dude. Joni, Sue, you're there for us. We love you so much. Know it's late for you and you're probably off in bed or getting there. So you take care and have a pleasant night. And we wish everybody else a pleasant evening as well. Any final thoughts here, Stan?
How about good night?
Should we do the say good night?
Say good night, Gracie.
Here, let me change our view here. Here we go. Here we go. Say good night. Say good night, Stan.
Good night, Stan.
I'm sorry. That was mean. That was mean to me. Mean Gene. Okay, here we go. I got to find the exit. There's an exit. Here we go. Let me make sure it's the right one. We got an exit video to play, and we'll see everybody next week, same time, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific. That's what they call it. Pacific. It must be the full moon. I'm just not making sentences very well today. But be that as it may, enjoyed having y'all with us. We'll see you next week on Taboo Topics with Gene Broida and Stan Murray. Thank you all. Peace out and catch you later.